continue with oral presentation 2. Discussed it last week. We'll discuss it here today. Perhaps Professor Betts will finish the lecture today speaking about his approach to how to make a good pitch. We'll see how the timing goes. If we don't get to all of that today, we'll certainly get there tomorrow and finish off our lectures tomorrow afternoon. So I wanted to start today, before discussing the pitch in a little more detail, to first take a quick look at the checklist that I posted on Quarkus announcements and in Piazza. And I'll just go quickly through this. I just want to make sure that everybody, that we're all on the same page, because we're having to make certain adjustments here with the final presentation. So we want all teams to submit their slides to Quarkus by Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. There's already, the assignment is open now for any teams who do want to submit. And if any of your team members are submitting pre-recorded slides, if they're unable to participate in the live stream presentation, those slides should be included as part of the team's submission. Then what we're asking is that on April 14th, join Zoom 5 minutes before your scheduled presentation time. Just refer to the presentation schedule. You'll see the URL that you'll be asked to use to join Zoom. And once you've joined the session, like today, you'll be held in a waiting room until the graders invite you to join your session. So then you'll be expected to share your screen with us. So have your slides ready in advance and have each slide numbered, presenter's name at the bottom of each, so we can be sure that we're able to identify who's speaking, whose slide it is. And because you're going to be sharing your screen with us, we think that it's easiest if one of your team members shares his or her screen and operates the slideshow for all team members. It's not something that we think is mandatory, but I think that it's probably the most efficient, the easiest way to make the slideshow operate. And you might, if you're able to practice this in advance with your CI, this would be a good thing to do this week if you haven't met with your CI yet. And as noted in the instructions, teams of 3 or 4 will have 13 to 17 minutes for the presentation. Teams of 2, less time if you want to take less, 10 to 17 minutes. And then the Q&A will follow that time slot. So you'll see here we've given quite a bit of latitude to the presentation itself. We don't want to box you into a 1 or 2 minute time frame. We want to give you pretty considerable leeway here, but we do then expect that you're going to complete your presentation within that guideline. If you come in, at 10 minutes, well, you've kind of missed the mark probably if you're a team of 3. If you're going over 17, we'll simply stop you. And the last point here, if there are any technical problems, certainly we'll try to resolve those as we're able to during the presentation. But if we find that that we can't overcome a problem, we may simply need to reschedule your presentation or some parts of it. But anyways, just quickly going through that, that's posted on Quarkus and in Piazza. A few of the tips that I've thought about over the last few days, and this is maybe not only for this particular presentation, but maybe in general some of the things that you're going to want to consider, because there's maybe a good chance we'll be doing more of this in the future, meeting like this. So it's a good idea to declutter your desktop. When you're sharing your screen often, sometimes you're going directly into a slideshow. Sometimes I'm going onto my desktop to draw up different documents that I want to share. And so I've had to kind of clean up my desktop a little bit so that it's not quite so hectic. I've noticed that with the camera that cameras are, I guess, generally pretty sensitive to light. And sometimes you may find you're in an area that's too brightly lit. Sometimes you'll be in an area that doesn't have enough light. And one way to check this is the second to last bullet point here. Practice recording yourself and then watching. You can set up a Zoom meeting, and then, it might be a meeting that you've scheduled for 2 or 3 days in advance, but you can go in yourself and start that meeting and do a recording on your own and practice. And even if you're not doing a recording, you can practice with your slideshow, whatever it is, just to get practice in Zoom. But it is a good idea to practice recording and then take a look back. And you'll see how the images look, how the visuals look. You get a better sense of the audio. So these are a few things you can certainly be doing. Going back up to the third bullet point here, put your camera at face level. You'll see, like with my camera, I can alter my screen so that I'm getting different, I can put myself in the frame a little bit better by adjusting my screen a little bit. And I think that probably where I am right now, as I see myself in the image, it's probably about right that you'd like to get your upper chest in the box. You don't want probably your face right up in the screen. You probably want something about here is what most recommend. When possible, be looking directly at the camera. Sometimes we're looking down at our notes, or we're looking at something else, or even we're looking at the screen, which is actually below the camera. So get in the habit of, looking at the camera, using that as your focal point. Avoiding quick movements is usually good advice here. You may notice that I'm using a virtual background, which you can do in Zoom. If you haven't found out about that, just do a quick Google search, and you can put in different types of backgrounds. Zoom actually recommends using a green background, so I tried it. But I've noticed that when I use the virtual background, if I introduce lots of quick movements, they look a little bit strange. How does that look, Vaughn, when I move my hand in the box there? Does that look a little bit odd?
It's a little jerky.
Yeah, it's a little jerky. And so avoiding quick movements or lots of movements is probably a good idea. As I said, you could consider a virtual background. Where I present here, I've got lots of hectic things in the background, so it's easier for me just to use the virtual background. And in terms of practicing, the last bullet point here, you might practice using what I call a heightened conversation tone for delivery, so that your tone is not too formal, maybe not too informal, that it's conversational, you're in conversation with someone, but it's a little bit more focused than a casual conversation with friends. It's the kind of tone you probably want to work within your professional life often, kind of that heightened conversation tone. A few points of etiquette. One of our CIs, Stephanie Halderson, she pointed me to this website, the Stanford University website, and some of their points on video conferencing etiquette. And some of these are probably, you know, kind of self-evident, that you want to ensure that all participants have the meeting invitation link in advance. Well, we saw today not so self-evident. I didn't know that I had to include that password. This is all kind of changing, but making sure everyone has what they need in order to get into the meeting. Making sure your presentation is ready to show, so that in your OP2 presentation, your slide deck is ready to show as soon as you open your screen to us and share it. If appropriate, choose a meeting facilitator. And here you may not need to do this for OP2, but it may be something you may want to consider. You may want a team member to be sort of in charge of running the presentation, you know, so that that person, for us as graders, as viewers, is there to help to guide us through the presentation. And so it may be something that your team may choose for OP2, or it could be something that just in the future you keep in mind as good practice. Certainly for OP2, ensure that everyone has their camera on. Here we're turning cameras off, but except for the presenters and co-hosts, but otherwise make sure you've got your camera on. You can turn your audio on. You may want to plug your computer into wall power. There's various sources, well, such as this one, that indicate that working with Wi-Fi sometimes creates a less stable connection, and the quality of video is not as strong. And often in meetings, when you're not speaking, you might want to mute your audio if that's a function that you have control over. That can be good practice. And just a few last points here. You know, speaking clearly in a normal voice, as I said, kind of heightened conversation. You don't want to sound scripted. If it sounds like you're reading your presentation notes, it interferes with the sense of being connected and engaged. When you begin speaking, you may want to state your name as a reminder. That could be good practice. I hadn't really thought of that, but it's could be helpful. And as I said earlier, avoiding quick movements. They can be distracting with the camera. And as I already mentioned, trying to maintain eye contact with the camera when you're speaking. And one thing that, just as is true in live presentations, sometimes we forget that when we're listening, want to stay engaged. If when your teammates are presenting, you're off looking at your notes in the corner on your table, it could be distracting to us. So help to support your team members when they are presenting by staying engaged as a listener. When you ask questions, allow time for slightly delayed responses. We're kind of getting used to that it takes, you know, a couple seconds for the response to come in. And just as you would in live presentation, it may be even more important with the video presentation to avoid interrupting others. It creates this kind of confusion at an audio level. So rather than interrupt, if you've got something that's kind of crucial, you may want to raise your hand. You can also raise your hand in the participants in the panel on the side. I think there's a raise hand option. I don't see it here because I'm in my full presenting screen, but we could look at that. So last week I walked through the different components of the final presentation. We spent a bit of time talking about different ways you could consider the opening strategy. And I suggested a couple that you might think about, looking back to made to stick principles, but certainly you're free to use whatever you think is effective to engage us, get the presentation going. I showed a few examples of agendas that you might consider, how you might actually improve on the ones we looked at. We looked at some of the considerations for the main part of your presentation when you're showing your kind of your status report, what you have achieved in the project to date, now that the project is completed. And one thing I will add there, I recommended that you use either video or screenshots. You could consider doing a live demo as well. This is certainly an alternative to those two. And I mentioned that we would spend a little bit of time going into more detail on the pitch today. So I wanted to start by looking at some of the different things you might want to be doing with your pitch. You could be connecting directly to your project. You may take the map that you've developed and discuss how you would take it even further, new functionality that you would bring to the project. You may want to look at one of the geographic information systems from your state-of-the-art review, going back to WD1. You might want to pitch an algorithm that you think would work effectively. There's lots of different ways you could go with this. And one of the things that we were recommending last week and that we recommend in the assignment instructions is that you use what's kind of commonly referred to as a situation problem solution structure, where you show us what's already out there, what already exists. You try to indicate where there's a gap, where there's an opportunity, something that others have not yet done. And then you show us how you're going to try to fill that gap. So these are a few, I'll just go quickly through a few of the past pitch ideas. Some of these ideas weren't finally taken into the final OP2, but these were ideas that some teams were considering. GIS and pizza delivery. It may not seem like the kind of the most exciting GIS application, but certainly one that is important to many. And the point here is to take a look at what already exists and show us that you can add something to that. There was a team that looked at GIS in public health, the ways that we can measure here. This was a measles vaccination coverage going back to 2012. So looking for medical purposes at different kinds of public health issues. Certainly GIS has a kind of a leading role in that domain. This was an interesting one, looking at a wind energy project, using GIS for that. And the team walked us through a number of different applications that this particular, I guess this was ESRI had developed for this project. Again, tracking disease, a lot of medical application that is very relevant, of course, to society. And this was for tracking environmental factors and sickle cell disease. And again, using this kind of color coding here to track the annual temperatures and the presence of the disease here. This one's kind of hectic, GIS charting of US transmission pipelines, so we can see for industry, for the economy, that GIS plays an important role. So I'm just quickly showing you these so that if, as a team, you haven't yet really decided what you want to do for your pitch, you can think very big here. You certainly don't have to remain confined to your street mapping project. And you could look at all kinds of different applications such as these. A current pitch idea, and I think some of you may have included this as a GIS in your state-of-the-art review, is the coronavirus. And so if you were interested in looking at this, you'd take a look at technologies that are already out there, GIS that are already tracking this. And if you do a Google search, you'll come very quickly to what Here Technologies is doing, tracking COVID-19. And we get these different areas of confirmed cases. I don't have the internet, the live internet up here, but this is just a screenshot of their map. But the one thing I noticed when I looked at this particular GIS is that they're using the data for their map on information that they're getting from Johns Hopkins University. And so as soon as I looked at that, I thought, well, probably you'd want to go to the kind of the authority here, go to the source, to go to Johns Hopkins University and see what their site looks like. And so that was my next stop. I took a look at the Johns Hopkins site. And for those of you following the coronavirus, we know that Johns Hopkins is an authority here, that the U.S. government is using their data, that most of the newscasters in North America are using their data. So this is a source that we would likely want to confer with ourselves. And we see as well that it's Esri that is doing the work for Johns Hopkins in developing the GIS. And many of you are probably familiar with Esri through the state-of-the-art review work that you already did. So again, we have a credible source that is creating this GIS that Johns Hopkins is then supplying the data for. And thought I would just quickly show this this GIS. Can you see the map here, Vaughn?
Nope, I can't see it.
Okay. Maybe I need to go back to screen share just a second. Sorry. So this is, and in fact, I'll update this right now. This is live on the internet. So it keeps growing, and this is an interesting kind of, I guess, what we call really state of the art. GIS, where we have the central map that is showing the cumulative confirmed cases. And we can go to any of the kind of the hotspots, and we can see the number of confirmed cases, the number of deaths, the active cases. And if we want to shift to just the active cases, then we can also do so here. And again, looking at the circular bands, we can see area by area, specifically the confirmed cases, the deaths, the recovered and the existing. And we can see down here how recently this was last updated. So this was updated as of 4:36, so within the last hour. And we can scroll here, looking at the different countries. We can also break this down to confirmed cases by provinces, state, so getting a more granular look. And we can even go in more granular and look at cities, confirmed cases. And Yeah, so it shows us that the specific information there. And and then as well over here, got that. We can see the total number of deaths if we want to look at that specifically. The total number of recovered. I think this was lighting up the map here. No, it's not doing that now. And we can look at different figures here. We can look at how the confirmed cases have grown, daily increase. So it's a very interactive map. And so that, certainly would give us something that, we could look at as a point of departure if we were interested in making a pitch in this area. And I'll just return to my slides here. So that's just a kind of a quick walk through the through this GIS. And if I were going to look further, I would look a little bit more closely at Esri to see what they're about. And the landing page for the Esri site has this this kind of very nice, engaging graphic, and the science of where, a very concise, memorable, interesting kind of point of entrance into their operation. And then there's information on Esri and specifically ArcGIS, which is what the Johns Hopkins site is using for their coronavirus GIS. So they're using ArcGIS to build their site. And we find out a little bit more about what Esri does. That part of the geospatial cloud enables you to connect people, locations, data using interactive maps. And so doing this kind of background information, we find out more and more about what Esri is doing here with the coronavirus. And this is another map that Esri has developed, the Esri story maps, which is an interesting way of combining both what we see in the graphic with a short narrative, a short story about what this graphic means. And so if I were choosing to work on this particular area, the coronavirus outbreak, as a area to pitch, I would be doing this kind of research. I'd be looking at the Johns Hopkins material. I'd be looking at other GIS. I'd be looking at some of the other things that Esri is doing, these kinds of story maps. And then after I'd done this initial research here, what do you think? Do you think this is enough research to make a pitch about a coronavirus GIS, or do you think you'd need to do kind of more research before you could really make the pitch? So maybe I'll just put a poll up and see what you have to say. So is this enough research on coronavirus GIS to make a pitch? Okay, we're getting pretty quick response. So just another 10 seconds. Okay, so it's, as you can see the results there, yeah? So 62% think yes, 38% say no. I'm sort of in agreement with the 62%. I would want to look a little bit further before I would want to get in front of a group and make claims about what already exists, where there's a gap, how I would fill that gap. So I would be inclined to research a little bit further before I would, you know, say make claims about what already exists out there. I don't feel that I'm really knowledgeable enough yet. And so I'll conclude here. When you do then get to the takeaway, just like the opening strategy, handle the takeaway. You know, do you want to try to go back to your opening point and reconnect with it? Do you want to summarize kind of what you've presented? Do you want to go back to your pitch? Focus on that, the key innovation. Is there a presentation theme that you want to reconnect with? You know, you want to try to think carefully about an effective way to close. You want to do it fairly quickly, but you want it to kind of close up, bring the presentation to a kind of a natural close. So, so this is something that's always a bit of a challenge, right? How do you close? So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions in the chat. I see there's some. Yeah, sorry again about the password. I know now that in fact we need to include that. Well, okay, so this question, theoretically, because we're only being marked on voice, do we have to use video? Some people have found, well, some people don't have cameras, so they can't. And so we certainly will accept presentations that in which it's just not possible to use the video. We want to be connected with all of you in the presentation, and we feel that certainly having you there visually as well as vocally gives us a fuller, a kind of fuller, more satisfying presentation with more engagement, more connection. So if possible, we definitely want you to use video. Yeah, you had ArcGIS in WD1. Yeah, ArcGIS is everywhere, right? They are kind of the leaders in the field. And so certainly if I were looking at sort of the state of the art, if I was looking to see what's already out there, I would take a pass by ArcGIS and see what they're doing. Do you have to do a state of the art review in the pitch? And I see Vaughn has answered sort of, you're trying to identify a gap, so we need to discuss what exists. Yeah, I think that's true. If you're going to convince us that there's a need for what you're offering, you have to try to show us that no one else is doing it quite like you are. If nothing else exists, it's you know, enough to say that. Yeah, if there's nothing out there. Okay, good. So we've got a little bit of time left. So so Professor Betts, if you want to switch to your sort of notes, your advice on giving a pitch, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. If there are any more questions for Dr. Tallman, this would be a good time to ask. If not, I'll start in. Okay, so here are some additional points that I try to follow in a pitch. They kind of line up well with what Dr. Tallman said, hopefully not too repetitive. Oops, let's see if I can get this to obey me. Okay, so the first thing is sometimes engineers are a bit uncomfortable with the whole notion of a pitch. They're like, aren't engineers all about data? And we should just talk about data. And the answer is no. right? So you might think, oh, engineering is all about design. I'm building things and I don't need to sell ideas. And pitch sounds kind of like a salesman, and I don't want to be this sales guy. Engineers do pitch ideas. You will have limited impact in your career if you can't convince other people to follow your ideas. So you're going to have to learn how to sell them. But you do it in a scientific way. You use appropriate evidence, argument, and data. So, you don't want to be this person who, you don't trust. Seems like he's just selling snake oil. Instead, but you do want to get people to believe in your ideas. So again, that means you need some arguments, some data, and you need to use some of the made to stick principles. It's not enough to have the best data in the world if you just put up a bunch of numbers. People won't remember your idea. They won't feel passion for it. So you do have to use the made to stick ideas to make it come alive. Okay, so when might you pitch an idea? This is an important skill, and it is a pretty important skill in your career. So if you're starting a company, so I've done that, and you definitely need to pitch things. You need to pitch things a lot, actually. First you want funding. So you might go to venture capitalists or angel investors. They're both similar. Just venture capitalists give larger amounts of money. Angel investors give significant but smaller amounts of money. But you have to convince them. Is this a good idea? Are you a good team? Why should I give you my hard-earned money? I need to see some prospect of return. You need to get customers. Okay, so your customers actually might fund you. In the end, in the company that I created, we considered venture funding or offered venture funding. We actually turned it down and instead got funding from our customers, which were semiconductor companies like Altera, Intel. But you need to convince them. You need to convince them to give you money for something you're going to build, or maybe you've already built it. You need to convince them to buy it. So that's, again, a pitch. Hiring employees. You want to get good people if you create a company, and they have to be excited about your vision. So you got to convince them. They're giving up a fraction of their life to work for you. So excite me, convince me this is the right choice. And if you don't get the right people, obviously you're not going to have a successful company. Okay, you may go, I'm not going to start a company, so maybe I'm not going to pitch anything. Well, I was actually a pretty unlikely entrepreneur because I tend to be a bit risk averse. I've gradually gotten less risk averse, so I wouldn't actually rule out starting a company, even if you think you're not likely to do it, because I would have said the same thing in undergrad. But you don't have to pitch things. So let's say you join an existing company, maybe a small one, maybe a big one. Hopefully you'll come up with ideas for how you could do new projects, make the company better, create new products. You have that idea, you've got to sell people. You can't do it all yourself, okay? So you've got to convince your boss, or perhaps many bosses, if it's a big idea, it's going to need a lot of investment from the company, to spend the company's money and resources on it. There isn't just a big pool of money at most companies where everybody can go do whatever they want. You have to convince others this is a good idea if you want to put resources behind it. Even very early in your career, you're a brand new engineer on a team, okay? So you're not trying to start a company, you're not trying to convince the leaders of your company to change something, but you just have an idea of how the team could do something better, how you could do your own job better. You've got to convince your boss to let you try that. So maybe you want to convince her to integrate some new feature in the company's product. If that's the case, it is a small pitch, right? It's just to your boss, but you still got to make a pitch to convince her that it's a good idea. Okay, so what do you need in a pitch? So the first thing you need is team quality. That's part of the background of your pitch. There's a truism that you should, if you're investing in a company or an idea, what matters the most is not actually the quality of the idea, but the quality of the team. People can change their idea as they go out and do agile development. So they're trying to do something, they find the idea is not really perfect. People don't quite want that, but they realize they want something else. You can change your idea, but it's harder to change your team. So team's really important. So part of your pitch is you want to convince people your team's good. Okay? And this quote is a famous one that venture capitalists follow. Okay, so you want to convince people that you're the Maple Leafs, not a Pee Wee league, and they're more likely to bet on you because of that. Maybe even convince them that you're the Montreal Canadiens who win lots of Stanley Cups. Maybe an unpopular thing to say in Toronto, but I'm a Canadiens fan. Okay, so your pitch, you're not going to explicitly say we're a great team. The earlier part of your presentation, where you've talked about what you've achieved so far, how beautiful and intuitive your mapping functions are, the cleverness of the underlying implementation and algorithms, that has established your credibility. Your knowledge, what have you built? The way you present, so the energy, the clarity of your presentations and answers, that is impacting the perception of the team. So all pitches in reality where you're trying to convince, somebody within your company, somebody within a charitable organization, some investors to invest, they always have an in-person meeting because they want to meet the team. Okay, so this is the first part of your presentation you can consider as you're convincing people you've got a quality team. You don't have to explicitly put it into your pitch. Okay, so now let's get into the rest of the pitch. So first thing you need is what's the vision? What's the opportunity? You're trying to fill a gap. So there's some problem and you're going to fill it. Okay, so I, a few years ago, mentored one of the hatchery entrepreneurship teams. So if you're not aware of the hatchery, it's an entrepreneurship incubator here at U of T. It's for U of T engineering students. So if you're interested in having an entrepreneurship experience, you should go learn more about the hatchery. And there's summer programs where for 4 months you form a team and basically try to create a company. A few years ago, I mentored a company called Fuelware that were 2 U of T engineering students, and they had an idea for heated clothing. Okay, so they had to figure out, well, who might like that? Who wants heated clothing? You're going to lose electronics to heat it up. Their initial idea was they were going to target tradespeople working out in the cold, so people fixing electrical lines and so on. And when they went out and did some investigation, they figured out there are actually a bunch of products already trying to target them. So they changed their idea. So that's, again, agile development. They decided that's not the best pitch. What we should change to are skiers, so sports people. And in particular, skiers go on chairlifts where they get cold, and then they ski where they get hot. So they surveyed, the first thing is they've identified that seems like a good use of smart heated clothing, electrically heated clothing. They surveyed the landscape. So this is kind of that state-of-the-art review. They're trying to see, does that gap really exist? Or maybe somebody else is building exactly that. So they went out and they looked for competitors and they found one. There's a company called Venture Heat that actually makes smart heated athletic clothing. So now you got to think, well, how are you going to differentiate? We should disclose that this competitor exists, because otherwise this may not be a realistic thing for us to do. But we got to say, what are we going to do that's different? And they found a couple of things. If you can't find anything different, then you actually want to try a different pitch, change your idea. But they found a couple of things Venture Heat didn't do. First thing is, for them, you just turned the heat to a certain level and you left it. Their batteries, they're heating up wiring inside of the undergarment, and they're keeping you at a certain temperature, but they don't actually monitor the temperature and see if you're getting too hot or too cold. So for skiers, this is the problem. You get cold on the chairlift, you get hot when skiing down, and this clothing does not adapt to that. So that was the first thing. Second thing is, it turns out that this clothing cannot be washed. All right, and that's a problem with a base layer. Base layer is effectively a form of underwear that you wear while doing athletic activities. So it's going to become pretty odoriferous after a while if you ski in this. So they wanted theirs to be fully washable. Okay, so they've identified their gap, they've identified the competition and how they're going to differentiate. And now they have to convince people that they can actually do it. So we don't need you to go very far into the details of how are you going to implement your plan, but you need to convince us you've thought about what the key challenges are, and you at least know what they are and where your difficulties are going to be, and you're going to work on them. Okay, so let's take that Fuelware company again. So they need to make this heated clothing. Okay, so wiring inside of a base layer. They need to have a battery pack. They need to have a feedback control system to monitor the temperature and decide how much current to draw, and they need to have software to control the whole thing. Okay, so that was their key challenges are basically this: good feedback control, make that software, make the hardware. And the other one was washable wiring. Turns out it's actually not that easy to put wires inside of a base layer like this and wash it without the wiring wearing out. But they actually found certain types of wiring and methods to connect it that actually was robust with machine washing. So we don't expect you to solve these problems in a pitch presentation, but acknowledging they exist tells us, okay, you know where your big problems are, builds credibility, you know what you have to do, and then you may have to go off and do it for quite a while. Okay, so those are the kind of the components of a pitch. What's the value or the gap? What's the landscape? So what competition is there? Is there still a gap when you consider them? And what do you need to do? Is this trivial to do, or is there some cleverness you need to bring to bear? You need to make it memorable. So the pitch is probably the most open-ended part of your final presentation. So use the made-to-stick principles. How can you make us care? How can you make us remember? Don't make it all about just dry numbers or an idea with no stories, no emotion. not credible. You got to use those principles to make us remember it and to care. If we were in class, I'd have you do this exercise. Stand up with your teammates and do a 1-minute pitch opening. So there's a phrase in venture capital community of elevator pitches that you should be able to get across the idea of your next venture while you're riding the elevator to a certain floor. So you should be able to do it very fast. You've got a few minutes to do it, your pitch, but you can practice with your teammates. Can you, in 1 minute, just give the opening of your pitch? Why do you want to do this? What is the value to society or to a business? And do they think it's memorable? So you can practice this a bunch with your teammates with Zoom and see, yeah, was that a memorable opening or not? If not, try again. Okay, what could your pitch propose? And Ken, if you see any, Ken or Abbott, if you see any comments on the chat, please let me know. So let me quickly give you a few ideas, because what we sometimes find is students, they don't think maybe as broadly as they could about ideas they could pitch. Okay, so visualization. You could make more data for specific users. So this is a GIS that does crime risk mapping, which has some value to society. You can stay out of high-risk areas. Has maybe some negative value. It might stigmatize certain communities. So something to think about if you pitch this, how you're going to say this is a positive thing. This is a company in Toronto called Blue Dot. They've been working on this for years now. It's a geographic information system to predict the spread of infectious disease. These are airline routes. They download the airline route maps from all the world's airlines, and they use this to predict the spread of infectious diseases like SARS, and nowadays like the coronavirus. This is also from Blue Dot. So Blue Dot used their GIS software to first map the 2014 Ebola epidemic in West Africa, and they used OpenStreetMap data. So actually the underlying data they're using is the same as what you're using. But they went further. So they went into optimization. So they used their software not just to map where are the Ebola cases, but also where should they put treatment centers to best serve the countries affected. And here, I'm going to go through the details, but basically what they're showing is the numbers are the number of cases, and they've got dots showing where you should put the treatment centers to basically minimize travel time to the treatment centers, serve the most patients. To basically respond to the epidemic. That links to some of the optimization you'd be doing in milestone 3 and 4, kind of going beyond just visualization. Because how do you get ideas for pitch? I mean, I've given you some ones that are kind of pretty direct build-ons to what you've done in this course so far, enhancements to a GIS, optimization of geographic data. But you can come up with much more wide-ranging ideas. So it's good to read about technology to get ideas. This is good not just for this course, but for your whole career. So I'm just going to highlight a few really big trends that might influence where you want to pitch. So first is that software is changing the world. So Mark Andreessen was actually the creator during his graduate degree of the first web browser. And he's now an extremely successful venture capitalist. And this article is interesting. It's about basically because software allows you to automate everything, it's basically changing the world in a huge way. It's disrupted travel agents. It's disrupted banking. It's going to disrupt many other things. So that opens up a lot of opportunities for innovation, for people to build new things. Sensors are going everywhere. So you've got lots of data, and this affects cities. So there's a project at U of T, this is the website, that looks at city scale data coming from sensors and uses it to optimize traffic flow and all sorts of other things. So smart cities. Software automation I talked about in one, software optimization of everything. So optimizing transportation within cities across the world, Amazon warehouses. A friend of mine who worked at Amazon, they optimize everything, how you pack those boxes, how the robots move. So former U of T graduate who created a robotics company to help optimize their warehouses. It was acquired by Amazon. Drug design is optimized with software now. So instead of just trying all sorts of random molecules, you simulate how the molecules what their shape will be and how they'll interact. So tons of optimization. You can link that back to your skills in this course by saying you've learned about optimization, you want to apply it to a different problem. That's fine, right? We're just looking for interesting pitches. Machine learning. So machine learning is really about algorithms that recognize patterns in data. And clearly tons of work in that area. Interesting article here on IEEE Spectrum on self-driving cars. Virtual reality and augmented reality, that links into geographic information systems too, because you need to overlay this virtual reality and augmented reality on typically a representation of the world. This is an article on Pokemon Go, but you could basically use, you could create something fun, right? So either something useful where you mix in views of the real world and your map of the world, or something fun, a new game. Anyway, those are just a few ideas. There are lots. So I guess I'm encouraging you. You don't have to think narrowly of what can I do that's a small tweak to my map. Often it's more interesting to have a pitch that's thinking a little more broadly, and we very much like to see those. Okay, so how do you come up with these ideas? Let us stop another minute or two. So brainstorm as a team. So do some background reading, do some searches, brainstorm. You practice that in APS 111 and 112. This is even more open-ended because you're not just identifying possible solutions to a problem someone's given you. You're identifying a problem, could be any problem, and then outline a possible solution. So that's really amenable to brainstorming lots of ideas. So create lots of ideas, pick your favorites, and refine them. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the sample pitch. I'll talk about that tomorrow. We're going to go through the Dr. Tallman and I have our sample pitch, and you're going to grade how well team Tallman, Yassine, and Betts would do on our pitch. So Abbott is in on this pitch too, whether he knew about it or not. With that, I'm going to end for today because we're at 6:02. And if anyone's got any questions, please ask them or just type them into the chat.
Looks like everyone's silent now.
Okay, looks like hopefully that was completely clear. That's the most optimistic interpretation of silence. So I'm going to go with that one. And we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Good. So long.